My sister raised her glass and called me just admin, like it was a joke everyone was supposed to understand, and the room did exactly what she wanted. It laughed, loud and easy. Like I had always been the smallest person in it. My mother didn't correct her, just smiled into her wine like the comment had been earned, and my father nodded once, slow and approving, as if reducing me to a title I never claimed somehow made everything simpler for them. Someone at the table leaned in and asked if I handled calendars or coffee, and my sister answered for me. Mostly paperwork. Like my entire life could be folded into a manila folder and tucked out of sight. I stood there, 3 feet from the head table at her engagement party, feeling every pair of eyes slide over me with polite dismissal, and not a single person in that room had any idea how wrong they were. If you've ever been in a room where your own family decides who you are without asking, then you already know how this feels, and if this story speaks to your heart, only if it truly resonates with you. Take a second to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now, because I want to know who's here with me in this moment. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and that night my sister's engagement party was the night everything in my family finally broke open and revealed what had been hidden for years. It didn't start there, though. It never does. It started long before the laughter, long before the champagne glasses and the polished speeches, back in a house where success had a very specific definition, and I had quietly failed to meet it in their eyes. Growing up, there was always a version of me my parents preferred, and it wasn't the one I became. Vanessa, my older sister, fit the mold, perfectly outgoing, charming. The kind of person who could walk into any room and be remembered before she even spoke. I was the opposite. Quieter. Observant. The one who listened more than she talked. The one who noticed things people didn't realize they were showing. That difference became a problem the older we got. At 16, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a report card full of A's, watching my father skim it like it was a receipt, not an achievement. "That's good," he said, already turning toward Vanessa as she talked about a student council event she was planning. Good. That was the word he used for me. Never exceptional. Never impressive. Just good. By the time I left for college, the narrative had already been written. Vanessa was going places. I was figuring things out. And no matter what I did after that, no matter how far I went or how hard I worked, that version of me, the one they decided I was, never seemed to change in their minds. So when I walked into that engagement party, wearing a simple black dress and standing just off to the side while Vanessa held court in the center of the room, I already knew what role I was expected to play. The quiet one. The invisible one. The one who should be grateful just to be included. And for a while, I let them believe it. I let my sister introduce me however she wanted. I let the guests nod politely and move on. I let the laughter pass through the room without interruption. Because the truth was, I didn't need to correct them. Not yet. They were all so comfortable in their version of me, so certain they understood exactly who I was and what I was worth, that they never thought to ask a better question. And in just a few minutes, someone would. They had no idea that everything they thought they knew about me was about to collapse with a single word. I moved through the room the way I always had in that house, quietly, deliberately, as if taking up less space made everything easier for everyone else, and for a while it worked because no one stopped me. No one questioned me. They simply let me drift along the edges of conversations that never really included me. The venue was one of those upscale country clubs just outside the city, the kind with polished marble floors and soft amber lighting that made everything look warmer than it actually felt. And every detail of the night had been carefully curated to reflect Vanessa's version of perfection. White roses lined the tables, champagne flutes caught the light like glass sculptures, and a string quartet played something soft and forgettable in the background, while people in tailored suits and expensive dresses laughed like they had known each other forever. I recognized the type immediately: corporate, polished, confident in the way people are when their lives have followed a predictable path, and I could see it in the way they interacted with my sister. The admiration, the easy respect, the assumption that she belonged exactly where she was standing. I picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, the condensation cool against my fingers, and took a slow sip while I listened. Vanessa was telling a story about her promotion, exaggerating just enough to make it sound more impressive, and every now and then she would gesture in my direction like I was a footnote in her life. Something minor but useful. "She helps me stay organized," she said at one point, her tone light, almost playful, but there was something underneath it, something practiced, like she had been saying variations of that sentence for years. A man standing beside her laughed and said, "Everyone needs someone like that," and Vanessa nodded, satisfied, as if she had just placed me exactly where I belonged in their hierarchy. I felt my phone vibrate once in my clutch, a short, subtle buzz, and I did not need to check it to know what it was. I had been waiting for it all evening, not anxiously, not nervously, just aware, like a clock ticking somewhere in the background. Timing mattered. It always had. I set the glass down on a nearby table and let my eyes move across the room, taking everything in the way I had trained myself to do over the years, the exits, the spacing, the way conversations clustered and shifted. Old habits. Useful habits. And then I noticed him. He was standing just slightly apart from the main group, not disconnected, but not fully absorbed either, watching in a way that suggested he was paying attention to more than just the surface. Tall, composed, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of posture that came from discipline rather than performance. This had to be him. Daniel Whitaker, Vanessa's fiancé. I had seen pictures, of course, heard the stories, the carefully selected details my family had shared, but pictures never tell you how someone actually carries themselves in a room. He was listening to Vanessa now, but his gaze shifted once, briefly, and landed on me. Not in the dismissal. I held his gaze for a second, then looked away first, not out of discomfort, but out of control. Let him wonder. Let him take his time. Across the room, my mother leaned in toward one of the guests and said something that made them both laugh, and I caught just enough of it to understand the shape of the comment. "Emily has always been more behind the scenes," she said, her voice warm, almost proud, as if invisibility were a virtue she had cultivated in me. Behind the scenes. The phrase settled into the air around me, familiar, worn, another label that required no correction because correcting it would have required a conversation none of them were prepared to have. I did not interrupt. I did not step forward. I did not claim anything that had not yet been asked of me. Instead, I adjusted the strap of my clutch on my shoulder and took a slow breath, steady and measured, the kind that keeps everything exactly where it needs to be. Because somewhere between the laughter and the music and the soft clink of glass against glass, the moment was getting closer. And when it arrived, it would not be loud, it would not be dramatic. It would be simple. One question. One answer. And everything they thought they understood about me would fall apart in the space between those two things. The room shifted almost imperceptibly when Daniel started walking toward me, not because anyone announced it, not because the music stopped, but because attention has a way of moving before people realize it, like a current under still water. And I could feel it long before he reached my side. Vanessa was still talking, still smiling, still playing the part she had perfected, but her voice softened just slightly as she noticed his absence from her immediate circle, and a few heads turned in quiet curiosity, tracking where he was going and why. I did not move to meet him. I let him close the distance on his own terms, the polished floor carrying the faint sound of his steps, until he stopped just a few feet in front of me. Up close, he looked exactly like someone who had spent his life learning how to read people quickly, efficiently, without making it obvious. And there was something almost clinical in the way his eyes settled on me, not dismissive, not impressed, just attentive. "Hi," he said, his voice calm, measured, the kind that does not need to compete with the room to be heard. "I do not think we have been properly introduced." There was a pause, just long enough for the moment to register, for the people nearest to us to lean in slightly, sensing something small but different unfolding. "Emily," I said, offering my name without elaboration, my tone even, unhurried. He nodded once, like he was confirming something to himself. Daniel, he replied, though, of course, I already knew. For a second, neither of us spoke, and in that silence, I could feel the weight of years pressing quietly against the present, every assumption, every label, every version of me that had been accepted without question by everyone in this room. Behind him, Vanessa's voice cut in lightly, almost playful, but with a thread of control running through it. "Oh, you found Emily," she said, stepping closer, slipping effortlessly back into the center of attention. "She is the organized one in the family. Keeps things running in the background." There it was again. Reinforced, repeated, packaged neatly for someone new. Daniel did not laugh. He did not nod along. Instead, he glanced briefly at Vanessa, then back at me, and something in his expression shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a detail had just clicked into place that did not match what he had been told. "Is that right?" he asked, but the question was not really directed at her. It lingered between us, open, waiting. I could feel the room tightening around that small exchange, conversation softening, attention narrowing, not enough to make it obvious, but enough to matter. Vanessa let out a short laugh, brushing it off. "Yes, she has always preferred staying out of the spotlight," she added, her tone smooth, confident, as if she were doing me a favor by explaining me. I did not interrupt her. I did not correct her. I simply met his gaze again, steady, unguarded, and let the silence stretch just a fraction longer than was comfortable. He studied me for that extra second, the kind of second most people skip because it requires effort, and then he asked it, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. "What do you actually do?" The question landed differently than the others had all night. It was not dismissive, it was not casual, it was precise. And for the first time since I walked into that room, no one spoke over me, no one answered for me. No one redirected the conversation before it could reach me. Vanessa opened her mouth slightly, ready to step in again, but something in the timing stopped her, and I could see it, the flicker of hesitation she was not used to feeling. The room did not go silent all at once, but it began to quiet in layers, laughter fading at the edges, forks pausing midair, conversations trailing off as attention gathered around a question no one had thought to ask until now. I did not rush to answer. I did not fill the space out of habit or discomfort. I let it breathe. I let every expectation they had built settle into that moment, heavy and certain, before I touched it at all. Because this was the part that mattered. Not the words themselves, but the timing of them. The distance between the question and the answer. The space where everything they believed still existed, just long enough to feel real before it disappeared. And as I looked at him, then briefly at my sister, then at my parents standing just beyond her shoulder, I knew they were all still holding on to that version of me, the one they had decided on years ago. The one that made sense to them. The one that kept everything comfortable. They had no idea it was about to vanish. I held his gaze for one heartbeat longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but because timing is everything when truth is about to rearrange a room. And then I answered him with a single word, calm, unforced, exactly as it was meant to be heard. Judge. It did not echo. It did not need to. The words settled into the space between us like something solid, something undeniable, and for a fraction of a second nothing changed, as if the room needed time to understand what it had just been given. Then it happened. A fork slipped against porcelain somewhere to my left with a soft, sharp sound that cut through the air. Someone inhaled too quickly. The quiet laughter that had been floating around us only moments ago disappeared, not gradually, but completely, like a switch had been flipped and no one knew who had touched it. Daniel did not move right away, but his expression shifted in a way that could not be mistaken, the kind of shift that comes when a piece of information forces everything else to be recalculated. Judge. He repeated, not questioning, just confirming, and there was a different tone in his voice now, one that carried weight instead of curiosity. I gave a small nod, nothing dramatic, nothing performative, just enough to acknowledge that the word was not a joke, not a misunderstanding, not something that needed to be softened or explained. Behind him, Vanessa went very still. It was subtle at first, just a pause in the way she held her glass, a delay in her next breath. But I saw it because I knew her. Because I had spent years watching her manage rooms like this, controlling attention, guiding perception, and this was the first moment I had ever seen her lose that control without knowing how to get it back. "Emily," she said, my name landing awkwardly in her mouth, like she was trying to find the right version of it and coming up short. "What do you mean, Judge?" The question sounded smaller than she intended, thinner, stripped of the confidence she had been carrying all evening. I turned slightly, enough to include her in the conversation without shifting my stance, and met her eyes. "I mean, I serve on the federal bench," I said evenly, the full sentence coming out just as steady as the single word before it, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. There was a ripple through the group closest to us, the kind of movement that is not physical but perceptible. Shoulders tightening, postures adjusting, people recalibrating where they were standing in relation to me. My father stepped forward half a pace, his brows pulling together as if he were trying to reconcile something that did not fit the version of me he had held onto for so long. "Since when?" he asked, his voice low, almost careful, like the answer might change depending on how it was delivered. "A while now," I replied, not offering dates, not offering details, because the specifics were not what mattered in that moment. What mattered was that it was true, and it had been true long before tonight. My mother's face had lost its easy composure, the polite smile replaced by something tighter, something uncertain, and I could see the realization settling in behind her eyes, not all at once, but piece by piece, as if she were replaying years of conversations and seeing them differently for the first time. Around us, people who had not paid me a second glance earlier were now looking directly at me, really looking, their expressions shifting from casual interest to something closer to respect, or at least recognition. And it happened so quickly it almost felt mechanical, like a system correcting itself the moment new information was introduced. Daniel straightened slightly, not dramatically, but enough that the change was visible if you knew what to look for, and when he spoke again, his tone had fully changed. "Your Honor," he said, the title precise, deliberate, and in that instant the last of the old narrative collapsed. Vanessa's hand tightened around the stem of her glass, her knuckles paling, and she glanced at our parents as if searching for something, confirmation, denial, anything that could restore the balance she had lost, but there was nothing there for her to hold on to. No one laughed. No one filled the silence. The room had gone still in a way that could not be undone, and for the first time in my life, I did not need to explain myself, defend myself, or shrink to fit the space they had assigned to me. I simply stood there, exactly as I was, and let the truth do what it had always been capable of doing. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, unevenly, like people were trying to find their footing on something that no longer felt stable, and I could see it in the way their expressions changed, in the way their posture adjusted, in the subtle distance that formed between who they thought I was and who I had just shown them to be. Vanessa recovered first, or at least she tried to, her smile returning a little too quickly, a little too tight at the edges as she let out a short laugh that did not quite land. "Well," she said, her voice lifting slightly as if she could pull the moment back into something familiar. "Emily has always been private." The word hung there, an attempt to reshape the narrative, to soften what had just happened into something less disruptive, something easier to absorb. I did not interrupt her. I did not challenge the word. I simply let it sit, because it no longer mattered what she called it. The truth had already settled into the room, and no amount of reframing could move it now. My father cleared his throat, the sound sharper than he intended, and stepped closer, his eyes searching my face like he was looking for a version of me he recognized. "You never mentioned this," he said, not accusing, not exactly, but there was something underneath it, something unsettled, like he was trying to understand how something this significant had existed outside of his awareness. I met his gaze without hesitation. "You never asked," I replied, my tone even, not defensive, not pointed, just factual. The words landed heavier than anything I had said so far, not because they were loud, but because they were simple, and simplicity leaves no room to hide. My mother shifted beside him, her fingers tightening around her clutch, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the quiet reevaluation of conversations, of holidays, of the years I had spent answering questions with just enough detail to satisfy curiosity without inviting deeper interest. "We thought you were still figuring things out," she said, her voice softer now, uncertain in a way I had never heard before. I gave a small nod, acknowledging the assumption without validating it. I said. "Just not in the way you expected." Around us, the energy of the room had changed completely. People who had once spoken over me now paused before speaking at all, their words more measured, their tone more careful, as if they were suddenly aware that what they said carried weight in a different way. A man I did not recognize offered a polite nod as he passed, his expression respectful, almost deferential, and I noticed how quickly others followed that shift, how easily perception recalibrated once it had a new reference point. Daniel remained where he was, steady, composed, but there was a new clarity in the way he looked at me, no longer searching, no longer trying to place me, but seeing me exactly as I was. "That is an impressive path," he said, not as flattery, not as surprise, but as recognition, and the distinction mattered more than anything else in that moment. Vanessa's hand lowered slowly to her side, the glass in it forgotten, and for the first time that night she did not seem to know where to stand, not physically, but socially, as if the position she had built for herself in relation to me no longer existed. "You could have told us," she said quietly, and there was something different in her voice now. Not the confidence from before, not the performance, but something closer to confusion, maybe even frustration. Like she could not understand why the script had changed without her permission. I looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, and saw not just who she was now, but who she had always been. Someone who believed that understanding came from being told, not from asking, not from listening. "I did," I said gently. "Just not in a way you chose to hear." The words were not meant to wound. They did not need to. They were simply true. And that truth settled into the space between us just as firmly as everything else had. No one laughed anymore. No one interrupted. The room held itself differently now, quieter, more aware, as if something fundamental had shifted and no one was quite ready to name it out loud. And I did not push it. I did not expand on it. I did not take up more space than I needed to. I simply stood there, steady, present, and let them adjust to a version of me that had been there all along, waiting to be seen. In the weeks that followed, the noise of that night faded, but the shift it created did not. Things did not suddenly become perfect, and they did not need to. My parents began to ask different questions, slower ones, more careful ones, as if they were learning how to speak to me again without assuming they already knew the answers. Vanessa stayed quieter than I had ever seen her, not distant, but thoughtful, like she was trying to understand something that had never required effort before. We did not have a dramatic conversation, no long apologies or emotional confrontations, just small changes that spoke louder than anything we could have said out loud. A call that lasted longer than usual. A question that waited for my answer. A silence that no longer felt dismissive, but respectful. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped feeling like I had to shrink just to be accepted in my own family. My life outside of them did not change, not really. I still woke up early, still carried the same responsibilities, still walked into courtrooms where decisions mattered and words had weight. But something inside me had settled. I no longer needed them to recognize my worth in order to believe in it myself. That night did not give me validation. It revealed something I had already built on my own. And that is the part I hold on to. If you have ever been in a place where people defined you before you had the chance to define yourself, I want you to know this gently and clearly. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of who you are just to make them comfortable. You do not need to argue your value into existence. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is become so grounded in who you are that the truth speaks for you when the moment comes. And when it does, you will not need to raise your voice. You will not need to prove anything. The right people will see you, and the wrong ones will finally understand what they missed. Thank you for being here with me, for for listening, for holding space for a story that may feel a little too familiar for some of you. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is for you, I hope you feel a little less alone knowing that someone else has stood in that same silence and come out stronger on the other side. If this story stayed with you, I would really love to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where people finally saw you for who you truly are, or are you still waiting for that moment to come? And if this story truly resonated with you, you can like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to you. My name is Emily Carter. I am 34 years old, and the lesson I want to leave you with is this: never let someone else's limited view of you become the definition you live by.